one of the big shifts that happened within me was realizing that human potential development is a human right, basic human right? That we all have been given a gift and we all have the right and we should all have the ability to express that gift. But we don't all have the resources and the ability to hire a coach and to go to trainings and workshops. So I started to reframe this whole human potential work and the assessment through that lens.
Welcome to The Deep Coach, the podcast where we explore the transformational journeys that shape us and that propel us to change the world. I'm your host, Jonathan Hermida, and in each episode, we sit down with those who have journeyed into the depths of spiritual transformation and who are now reshaping the world through their presence and their work. In listening to these incredible human beings, you'll find insight, inspiration, and practical tools to support your journey as a coach and as a human being. Today's guest is Mark Vandeneijnde, co-founder of Being at Full Potential and creator of the Human Potential and IDG assessment platforms. Mark is an incredible guy, and in this episode, we talk about his time working in a corporate environment and how he mustered up the courage to quit his job without having a secure landing, all while having 2 young kids to take care of. So imagine that. We then talk about his entrepreneurial challenges and how he eventually emerged resilient as ever and created one of the most holistic frameworks for understanding human potential today. We go into how human potential is actually measured and how to use that data to improve your life. And we also talk about how the future is going to ask us to become more human in the age of AI than ever. This is a wonderful conversation. Let's dive in.
Mark, it is so good to be here with you. As we do in this podcast, we talk about the transformational journeys that have defined the person that we're now listening to and sitting across from. When you think of Mark prior to the onset of your own transformational journey, how would you describe who Mark was in that time?
Yeah. So it would have been pre-2010. And there was already quite some depth to Mark, to myself. But it was kind of compartmentalized in certain aspects of my life. Like I would say, whenever I'd be around good friends, there would be always deep, meaningful conversation. And, that's what I thrived in those places. But then there was another side that, was kind of caught up in, the corporate rat race. I mean, it's a bit of a strong word, but, the corporate world where there were these expectations and sort of societal definitions of success, that I was struggling with and didn't quite make sense to me, but I didn't know any other way. And so there was definitely confusion about how to reconcile these things. Like on the one hand, I had a feeling like when I was really alive and when I was having impact. And on the other hand, there was this whole side of, big chunk of my life that just felt misaligned. Yeah. Out of touch with it.
Mm. You mentioned there was already
fragmented might be a nice way to summarize it.
a big fragmented. That resonates with me as marker of my own during my own time. So you mentioned that there was already some depth to Mark. When would you say that depth began? When did you start sort of questioning life and sitting with life at a deeper level?
I would say the earliest memories, vivid memories, probably were when I was like 10, 11 years old. And I have memories of being, before going to sleep, like in my room, in my bed, and actually, like holding people that I knew were suffering in the world, that I would see on the evening news or, you just sort of like pick up on all these things and actually make a prayer for them. Like I remember actually praying in my mind, that people would find peace and happiness. And it was a daily thing. Remember, it was a daily thing. And it was nothing anyone ever told me or taught me, or it was just something that came very natural. And I often reflect back on those things. And I think that was really the beginning of when I look back, it's the beginning of see the sense, the sensitivity that I think is quite core to who I am. And I didn't acknowledge it then. I didn't understand it. I didn't talk about it like that. But it was around that time, 2010, that I was talking about, where the transformation happened, is where I started to embrace more and more that side of me, recognize it, acknowledge it, see it as a gift rather than something to fix. And that was really, I think, quite an important, quite an important transformational moment for me.
Mm. Before we get there, you got
Yeah.
to the corporate world first. What was driving you to make the decision to enter into the corporate world? What was your North Star at the time?
It was just not really knowing anything else. That was also my choice of what to study at university was kind of a default choice. It was the easy one. It was the one I didn't have to think about too much. I looked at my family, my father, my parents, and sort of, just thinking like, okay, well, that's how I was raised. That's what I saw in my father. So, that's what I should be doing as well. So there was not a lot of conscious thought about it. It was more, I ended up in business school, and then I ended up in a corporate, which, that's a whole story in itself. Like I don't know how they actually hired me, because it was a whole bunch of different events that led to it, but I never felt like I was qualified for it. I never felt like this is something that I deserved, if you like. It sounds a bit strange, but yeah, I just ended up there.
Yeah. How did you reconcile that during your career?
There was I ended up, at the end, I did end up in an area of the business. There were quite a few things that I enjoyed because it was in research and consumer research. So there was actually a lot of opportunity to go out and speak to people and understand their need, understand how they use the products and why they use the products. And so that whole piece of interacting with the outside world, the consumers, the people who are using the products, and then trying, then finding ways to build that into the innovation pipeline and all. Like I kind of found a little bit of a niche there where I was pretty good at it, and there were aspects of it that I really enjoyed, but there was always, especially later on, there was this sort of sense of what for, just to sell more of X, right? And it was like people, these people that you'd go and speak to sometimes for hours, they would open up, talk about their lives and their hopes and dreams and everything. The only thing that had to think about is, how can I make more money off of this, right? It's like, how do you utilize these insights to sell more? And at the end, it was, it was not that inspiring, but the work itself was very interesting. The uncovering insights, getting to know people, understanding their deeper motivations. And that was, I think, what opened then the door to coaching, everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. But something happened in 2010 that had you reconnect with that deeper aspect of yourself. What was it that happened in 2010 in particular?
So a few things. One is I discovered coaching back in 2008, and first by being coached myself. So I went through a whole coaching process and discovered my values, something called life purpose, which I had no idea even existed, right? But like, to be connected to something much bigger, like, why am I here? Being able to answer that question, not just answer it intellectually, but actually feel like, yes, there is a purpose to my life. And a big thing, what I was mentioning before, is this whole sensitivity thing, which for most of my life, I was being told, you're too sensitive. You're just too sensitive. Why are you so sensitive? And so it really started to feel like that was a deficit, something that was a hindrance that I had to fix, or I had to sort of overcome. And then through the coaching and through this personal journey, I discovered, that sensitivity is actually a gift, right? It's when it's harnessed, right? And when it's channeled in productive ways, that it can be a tremendous gift of being able to sense into things and to use that information, right? Because that's what it is. It gives you more information to be able to, to do things with that. So that was a big part of embracing actually myself more in my oldness, rather than seeing it as, there's things need to be fixed. And it was not just friends and family that would often tell me about the sensitivity, but it was also feedback I'd get at work, and also a lot of things around leadership. Like, I was told you need to speak up more, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'll speak up when I have something to say. But no, you need to speak up. You need to be visible. You need to stand out. And it was that type of leadership that just never felt right. It was always like something is not right with it. Yeah. And I guess I started to make sense of it, started to understand it. And that was really, I think, quite a big turning point.
Mm. How else did the sensitivity show up in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, it helped me a lot when I would go out and do the research. I think I was always really good at picking up on what is not being said as well. Like how am I feeling when I'm interacting with this person? What does it mean? And sort of taking that into account as well when we're doing the analysis and the findings. So I think I was doing that. I think I also was pretty good at reading team dynamics, where there was tension in the team. But I would hold it all to myself. Like I had no way of expressing it, of sharing it. Didn't know what to do with it. Right. So it would be things and other people's tension, energy that I would pick up, and it would just sit with me, and I wouldn't have a very good outlet for it. I didn't know how to work with it. And I guess it did start to feel like a heavy load, at times. And that period felt very heavy. It was definitely not, sort of transformational, very light. Everything was great. There was a lot of things that I didn't know how to process. There was a heaviness to that.
Yeah. And a questioning, and perhaps not even in a questioning in an open way, more questioning like why, what's wrong with me? Why don't I fit into this environment? Things like that, I imagine. So then you decided to go off on an entrepreneurial journey in that time.
Yeah.
Tell me more, or tell us about that decision.
Yeah, it was amazing actually, because 2008 is when I started my coaching training. It took about a year and a half, 2 years. So by the time 2010 came, I was certified. I had my ACC. I was certified, and I think that was a sort of a big part of feeling ready. And I started to get sort of a sense of how I could contribute back to the organizational world, because I was quite passionate about serving organizations and bringing out more of the potential, even though I didn't really use that word yet, but it was something like there's things here that are untapped, and through coaching, I can bring that out. I was starting to discover that. And it was building up the sense of, okay, I need to step out. That one day I unannounced, also not aligned with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I told my boss at the time, I said, I'm resigning. And it just came out. It was very much in the moment, Jonathan. It was quite amazing when I think back of it. And then of course, going back home and sharing that with my wife, and then the reality settles in, and it's like, okay, now what? Right. But it was building up, but it was not something that I had aligned, that I'd planned, that I'd said, that I was really ready for. I mean, no, actually I was ready for it, but it was spontaneous at the same time.
Which is interesting because you have 2 small kids at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
How were you relating to that? Like on the one hand, there's this impulse, this knowing that I need to leave this situation. On the other hand, there's a stability, financial and otherwise stability that comes with staying in the job, which benefits growing a small family, obviously.
Yeah.
So how did
Yeah.
you relate to that in that moment?
You know, there was a huge tension on the family. My wife and I were both working full time, both in the same company as well. We would be dropping the kids off at 7 in the morning, pick them up at 7 at night, and everything was rush, rush, rush. There was just tremendous amount of stress. They were young, and it was like I really had this feeling like why even have kids if you can't spend quality time with it, right? And I knew deep down that something had to change. Like it was going to break. Something was going to break unless there was a significant change. So that was a big part of me making the decision to leave because I knew my wife wasn't going to do it. She, was enjoying her job. She's quite career minded. And, and so if something was going to change from that standpoint, it was going to be me. And I think that was a big part of it. It was the family, it was the kids, it was my desire to be with them. It was my desire to create more space for all of this, as well as a sense of what I could potentially be creating once I'm outside of that, the entrepreneurial aspect. But I would say it was maybe more for the well-being of the family
Mm,
first, and the entrepreneurial thing sort of secondary.
mm.
Uh, then, I had this grand idea and I was going to go and, build something. And that's why I was leaving.
Was that idea clear already, or was it vague, but you knew you were going to build something?
I had my idea, but it was not a calibrated idea to the market. It was something that was inside of me and that I was really excited about. But when I would start sharing with people, they would look at me kind of very confused. Um, and so, even the way I talked about the work and how I was labeling it, all of it was just based on my deep passion and excitement and everything that I've been learning around coaching. But I wasn't taking into account sort of meeting people where they work. That was really
Mm.
uh, my company was called Inner Voice Calling, and I wanted to work with companies, businesses. And the idea was like, well, help you find your inner voice as a company, right? The inner voice of what you stand for. And it was just, people, like the first people that I would go and speak to are, of course, people that knew me and trusted me from the work environment, that were, suppliers and contacts that I had. And, they would give me opportunities to come and talk to them and share what I was doing. And even though they really wanted to help me, they were like, I can't, it's not tangible enough, right? It's not, I can't hire you, in that capacity right now.
Mm.
And that took about a good year and a half of just trying and coming to the realization that something, that I'm deeply passionate and everyone admired that. But it was also, there was a blockage there.
Mm.
So that was my first sort of big questioning after stepping out. Yeah, and then just to get back on your question about the family, there was a big renegotiation of sort of, yeah, the recalibration of the family, the whole thing, right? Going from double income to single income. My wife trying to understand what it is I was doing, why I was doing it, my family, my friends, so there was a huge sort of moment of transitioning happening in that realm as well. So on the outside, the business was sort of blocking, and within was also a lot of confusion, like what's going on with Mark, that type of.
Yeah. So you get to the end of this year-long experiment, more or less year-long, and it's not panning out in the way that you had anticipated or wanted, which I imagine creates an additional inner tension, but also tension within the family. What was your thinking towards the end of that sort of year and a half stretch of, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say the big thing was a shift from thinking that I knew what was needed to going back into a mode of not knowing. Right. So I was very confident I had exactly the solution. I had the answers to really unlock breakthroughs within companies. But nobody understood it. So the big shift was when I took a step back and said, well, maybe I don't know, or I don't know it well enough. And let me go back into the mode of not knowing, and let me go and talk to people and learn from them, to listen to them, understand what their needs are, and do some research. And I come from a research background, right? So I was in market research. So I would say one of the big shifts is when I went back into research mode and ended up doing I ended up being a documentary film on heart in business. So understanding what does it mean to bring heart into business. And I went to speak to people from all different parts of, some science, from the science realm, some more coming at it from a spiritual side, some people in business who had stories to tell. And I worked with a documentary filmmaker, and we ended up creating this 15-minute film, which brought really to life my vision, but through the stories of other people. And it was like a rite of passage, Jonathan. It was like me going through that rite of passage. And it really shifted the way that I engaged with prospects and potential clients. It was, it was all of a sudden, it wasn't anymore about telling them what they should do and how I could help them, but it was more about listening to them and starting a conversation and sharing, the insights of this research with them. And it was all about dialogue. And that's when things started to get unstuck. And that's when people started to show interest. Like, oh, there's an interesting story here. I want to listen to. I want to know more about. That was a big moment.
I want to sit here for a moment because there's so many important points. When I think about our audience, there are many coaches out there that really want to make it. They want to start their business. They want to venture out, and they have their stable job, but they sense there's something more. And I know I can do more. I know there's more impact. There's something within me pulling me, but, money and stability and security. What do you think it was inside of you that gave you such confidence within the unknown? Because to be in a position where you go down to a single income household, and the first sort of ideation of your venture doesn't quite work out, and you're like, okay, now I need to go into the unknown. I could just imagine listeners being like, ugh, like how do you trust life, yourself, what you have inside of you enough in that moment to continue forward?
I think by that time, a year or 2 years had gone by. The benefits of me being at home were starting to become visible to everyone. To the kids, to my wife, she was starting to see that the quality of life was starting to go.
Mhm.
The income had gone down, but that was also super interesting, is the realization how, happiness and income are correlated maybe to up to a certain extent. But then beyond that, it doesn't correlate anymore. And I think we had gone beyond that point where there was an increase in happiness. And so by stripping things down, and a lot of costs we were able to save a lot, because we used to have to, pay for daycare and for, the nanny that would pick her up and drop her off. And all these things, would no longer be needed. And it just started to feel like, hey, we can still do what we like doing. still go on holiday once in a while. We're actually living a pretty good life. And so all of that fear initially, where you think like, oh, I need this, we've had this, so we need this, started to lessen. The relationship with the kids was way better. You could see them starting to thrive. And my wife was starting to kind of, even though she was really not interested in what I was doing per se, but she was starting to see that this whole rearrangement of the family dynamic actually had quite some benefits as well. So I would say, it's yes, you don't want to put anything risk in terms of, your ability to take care of your family. But at the same time, there are cases where you may have more than you need. And, scaling back income actually can be a good thing. You start to value things also a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also found that with boldness, with risk taking, where you never saw where the ground could possibly come from, some ground always comes. I've noticed it with my own journey in my own life. I've noticed it with other clients and people that I've worked with. I've even noticed it with people not on any particular inner journey, that they're freaking out. Oh my God, where's, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? It's always something, some way. Maybe it's a hand, maybe it's an unknown opportunity. But if we never take the risk to venture off into the unknown, you can't possibly know what's possible. We're going to be speaking about human potential shortly. And I know trust plays a role in maximizing our human potential. And so being able to trust in something deeper, that there is something working itself out, especially for those of us that are on this journey and calibrating towards alignment with life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think part of what kept me going is that, what I was sharing before, that very strong sense of purpose.
Mm.
When I found out more about who I am and why am I here and life purpose and all this, it was such an anchor, and it gave me so much strength, and it gave me a lot of courage. And, it's like the boldness sort of comes from that. I felt that really.
Yeah.
The boldness is, there's something here supporting me. There's something here that is speaking to me, that is telling me that, yes, take the next step. Yes, take the next step.
Yeah.
There's support. You might not see the support. You might not understand how it works, but there is support here. There's that ground underneath the feet that will keep showing up. So I did feel that quite deeply. Yeah.
So then you create this documentary and several insights come from it. What are the main insights that came from these interviews that you had with folks?
One that stands out is how we are storytellers, and how reality is actually the story that we tell. And becoming aware that we can become active storytellers. That's one insight that was so powerful for me, and it made so much sense. And if we want to change something, we need to tell a new story, and we need to tell it in a way that it's really coming from our deeper belief. And it impacts our language, it impacts our mindset, how we look at things, how we deal with things. So starting to tell new stories. And for me, it was the story of success. That was one of the big changes. And how I talked about success, how I thought about success.
How did you talk about it? And then how did you begin talking about it?
So I talked about it in the same way that I was conditioned to talk about it at the beginning, after stepping out of the corporate. And it was, it was not how many widgets have you sold, but it's how many clients have you signed up, right? And how many clients you plan to sign up, and what is, how many years do I need to be able to get the same level of income as I had before? And so there's this whole mapping, planning, checking every quarter, like, where am I, like that whole thing, being able to predict and to lay out. And, this was a whole new paradigm I was stepping into, right? There was not a clear path on how to do things. And I didn't even know exactly what I was going to be creating. So that was part of where it all fell apart, of course, because you're not going to meet any of those criteria. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, well, is this a failure? On one hand, yes, it's a failure, but on the other hand, no, this is a much bigger journey than I've said yes to. And, this is just the very, very first step. And so, this move back into not knowing and becoming a researcher and putting on that research mindset and going and speaking to people, that became my new definition of success. So the more conversations I can have, the more people I can talk to, the more I can listen and engage and open up, like it was much more about the quality of the engagement than I would define success on, because I knew that the more quality engagements you have, the more things are going to happen, right? The more opportunities will come. So I put my focus much more on the quality of the relationship. And that came a lot from just being really curious and interested and learning. And then people wanted to also learn from me. So that just happened naturally. And then, I guess the other part was the whole family thing, prioritizing that and thinking about success as being able to spend time, much more quality time with my kids as they grow up, because it happens so quickly. And before you know it, they're gone. And I didn't want to be the person that looks back on his life and said, oh, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd spent more time with my kids. That's the one thing I know I will never, ever say. I'll never have that regret.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful shift in many ways.
Yeah. So success became a very different concept for me. And I started talking about it very differently. And I think that's sort of the new type of story, the storytelling.
How did it begin?
Yeah. And I actually got to speak with the CEO of Heart Math Institute as well. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I am, but for those that aren't familiar, can you share what it is?
Well, yeah, they've really taken, I think, a very scientific approach to understanding the intelligence of the heart and being able to measure. They have these devices that can measure coherence and heart resonance, and they've been able to show that the frequency of the heart has is very expansive, and it can absorb and pick up on much more information. And so that was a fascinating part of, the heart in business project, right? Research project. And the fact that there was science behind it, and that, the whole idea that intuition is, it's part of that, the resonant part, right? It's us tapping into an intuitive knowing, how valuable that is in a business environment, especially in an environment where there's more and more uncertainty, right? There's more and more the VUCA, right? The uncertain, the complex world that we live in. There's so many limits to what we can figure out just with our mental capacity, right? And there's this whole side of knowing that is, pretty much shut down in the business world. And to be able to talk about that it's a resource that is totally underutilized. Mm. And that is what is part of heart and business, is awakening that side of ours, that ability that we have, and allowing it to become more vocal in the, decision-making processes. And so, yeah, that was a really, I think, important insight. and to be able to have somebody else speak about it, right? And like an expert, somebody who has been years and years of research and science behind it. I think showing that to people in business, it was like a wow, right? Because yeah, it sort of gives a little bit of evidence to things that deep down we know, but we don't acknowledge because it's sort of like out there. So to make it, give it a bit more gravitas was very helpful.
Yeah, because one of your challenges was making the intangible tangible for these organizations. Like, why should we hire you?
Exactly.
What's the actual benefit in hiring you?
Yeah.
To understand this inner voice, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So then at one point you develop your own measurement system.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the being a
And
potential assessment?
exactly. Yeah. And this is where a lot of that research came into handy, because there was so much analysis that we did afterwards. And there was sort of mapping and different clusters and things like, okay, this whole heart business thing, it's huge. It's a big, there's many dimensions to it. It's not one, there's no one answer to what it is. There's many things, right? There's many dimensions to it. And this is where a good friend of mine and somebody who, also is equally fascinated in this whole space and who comes from India and has a lot of the, the wisdom, carries a lot of the wisdom from the spiritual traditions in India. And we went to university together. We're great friends. And we would spend a lot of evenings, talking about all of these things, right? And we did our coaching together, and eventually our paths crossed, and we realized that there was an opportunity to create something that would make the intangible tangible. And that was actually the question we had. What if we could measure? It started with heart, and the original big overall measure was going to be the heart quotient that we would measure. And then very quickly, it moved to human potential, the human potential. And just mainly because we were starting to realize that language was important. But the essence, the essence of it was very much the same. And so a lot of these interviews and a lot of the research was input into the creation of the model. So the human potential model, which is shaped in a house, and it has, 4 different dimensions or states, 23 dimensions. And it just came together very organically, it was months and months of building and mapping. And then all of a sudden this framework started to appear. And then from the framework, there was a whole exercise of what kind of questions would we need to ask to be able to get to some insight on where people stand, on all these different measures. So there was a questionnaire that we started to build. And that was really the beginning of it, 2013, around there.
Yeah. How would you define human potential?
You see, I've been in this for over 10 years, Jonathan. I still don't have a definition, an easy definition. And I think, again, because it's multidimensional. But I can maybe refer to the 4 states, right? The 4 states of the house. There's the being aware state. So, how well do we know who we are, what our purpose is, what our values are? And, I think that is one very important part of expressing and unleashing and realizing our human potential. Then there's being inspired, and that's the ability to access imagination, ideas. So things like curiosity, play, being comfortable with the unknown are really important aspects of unleashing our inspirational capacities. And then being abundant. So the mindset of abundance. So, holding life as already abundant. Everything is already there. And things like trust and acknowledgement and generosity play into that. And then finally being in service. And that's where do we direct our efforts, right? Is it in service of something greater, or is it, for our own benefit? And I think, the human potential gets unleashed when we're really working towards something that is bigger than ourselves.
Mm.
So the service, abundant inspiration, awareness, I would say, are key elements of unleashing human potential. But human potential in itself is the innate gift and beauty that resides in all of us. And that is the underlying belief, is that as human beings, we all have incredible potential within us.
Mm.
It's a matter of expressing it and realizing it. It's not that, some people have more potential than others. I think at the very beginning, that was our starting point, is that human potential is inherent in every single person. It's in our God-given gift.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because what the potential is ultimately sort of being expressed as is going to be unique for each individual. So that individual's unique human potential is going to be different, than, because sometimes we think about human potential and we think about it in terms of, this sort of end goal that if somebody is maximizing themselves, anyone can reach. But it's, to me, this definition of your definition, your framework makes a lot of sense to me. Now, you mentioned language and language being important, but I also recognize that the audience receiving the language is just as important, because this definition wouldn't resonate with an athlete, for example, when they're talking about human potential. Their human potential is different and their markers are a little different. Certain business people, certain people in other fields, right? They're thinking about human potential in a different way. Now, what is it about your audience? Who are you speaking to in particular when you talk about this version of human potential, where we're talking about things like inspiration, abundance, service, and awareness?
Yeah. There's actually quite a lot of similarity between those four states I mentioned, and the science on flow. And, I think that the realm of sports, right, where people are talk about entering into their flow state and reaching their full, potential in the sports. There are many things that are actually kind of resonant. Again, the language is a little bit different, but there are definitely connections there.
Yeah.
The audience is very much organizational leaders. So there's one little story that I always like to tell, and it's somebody within the company that I worked for who was really quite a champion of sort of this entrepreneurial journey that I was on. And every couple of months I would go and visit her and just give her an update, and she would share some feedback. And so that was kind of an ongoing thing. And she was always very supportive. And one day I came with this house framework and I laid it out, and I said, yeah, I think we've gotten, a really nice way of looking at what human potential is, and we're starting to measure it. And she looked at it and said, yeah, this all speaks to me. It's very clear. It feels very comprehensive and holistic and all of that. And she said, I would love to take this forward, in the organization, but there are measures here that are missing. It doesn't help me understand what does this impact, at the level of my dashboard, right? And so how does it help me build engagement with my people? How does it help me unlock creativity and innovation, right? The innovation pipeline, things like this. And so we went back and created from that. It took a while, of course, but created the human potential iceberg. And so you have a tip of the iceberg, and then you have everything underneath the water. And these four states were sitting underneath the water, right? And then there was another layer even deeper than that. But on the top, we had these 6 organizational performance metrics. And so these are the things that get impacted by the being. So if you make shifts at the being level, you're going to see shifts in our capacity to come up with innovation, to come up with, or for people to feel more engaged in their work. So we were starting to draw connections between being level interventions and doing level output. And so brought this into a framework. And then the next time I went and visited her, she looked at it and she was like, yeah, this is it. You got it. Now I'm sold. And, a few months later, we were doing a project with her team. And that was all that was needed was for her to be able to, in her mind, have the puzzle kind of complete. And that was a really important moment on the journey. Build a lot of confidence that this is, it was like a full circle, right? I'd left the company, gone on this journey. Nobody understood what I was doing. And then slowly things started to get more and more specific, concrete. And then you go back in and they hire you, right? So, but now from the outside. And so that was it was around 2017 that happened.
I hope everybody's paying attention to this, because the iterative process of entrepreneurship, of business ownership, sometimes we think, yeah, I have this idea. Okay, I can start my business and off I go. But market is going to dictate how accurate our assumptions are or inaccurate. And rather than taking them personally, taking them as data points and understanding there's something that I'm missing, either in the product, in the service, in the messaging, in the messenger, in the final audience, there's something that is missing here. And can I take a scientific lens to this, do the proper research, take my time to understand? Because this, in my opinion, is true empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes and really truly seeking to understand what is it that they need. If I'm here to serve them, let me really seek to serve them. And so this is a 7-year journey to get to this point where it's like, okay, this is tangible. This is something that an organization can really take, and hire me for, and so it feels like such an important lesson, because so often we miss it, especially those of us starting our journeys of entrepreneurship just now. Right.
Beautifully summarized. The iterative process. It's very, very important. And it's hard, you work on something, you're so passionate about it, and you don't get the response that you expect or you want, to then still be able to process it and to transform it into something new.
Yeah. Which is why the deeper why is essential. Like having a deeper why as to why you're in this, beyond just external measures of success. Because if you're only measuring yourself externally, then the first no, second no, third, you're like, oh, why am I doing this? I'm not getting the results that I'm after. Yeah. With your measurement, with the being at full potential tool, what would you say are some of the pieces that most leaders tend to struggle with or have trouble with?
Yeah. You mean in like which dimensions tend to be more underexpressed?
There we go. That's better language. Thinking accurately. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
Yeah. Trust is one of them.
Okay.
Trust. And because we define trust quite holistically, in bigger trust, right? It's the trusting yourself, but also trusting the unfolding, right? So that in the business context, you often see that one less expressed. So an area of attention, an area that you want to draw more people, want to know and understand more. The other thing is harmony, which is defined as the ability to create space for reflection and self-care. So basically the slowing down, right? The slowing down, the pausing, taking a step back, reflecting. That is often less expressed in environments where people are constantly moving, constantly pushing. And that then correlates often with, the inability to get to breakthrough. So there's very much this interesting connection between pausing, reflecting, taking a step back, and being able to see new ways forward, right? Getting out of that sort of very incremental approach to business development, where you just tweak and make things a little bit better, but you're missing the breakthrough. You're not seeing the picture. You're not really getting to the true innovation. So yeah, and creativity also linked to that reflection piece. When you can create quality time for yourself is also when you can work through tensions that might be there, and those tensions then reveal, kind of new creative ways forward. So creativity and slowing down, there's often a story there that gets told when we do the debriefing.
Yeah.
Because that's the other interesting thing is the debriefs don't happen in typical ways where, we come as experts and tell them, here's what the data means and this is what you should be doing. It's very much done through a coaching method where, you share the data, but you don't interpret it. It's the client who interprets it, who finds the interpretation. And they have to find their own story. And of course, we support with that, but it's a beautiful process of them making sense of what it means. And as they make sense of it, they take much greater ownership in the next steps, right? Because it's sort of come from them. And that's what I love about the tool, because it really works so well with coaching, and coaching being, really the methodology of change or transformation. And that's really the only thing I believe in when it comes to change.
Yeah.
It has to come from the inside out. So
Yeah.
they work well together.
Yeah, I can see that, because it's a bit of the science of self. And the only way that one can, it's to understand oneself, one has to be the one that is observing and making meaning and interpretations and all of that. So that is what I appreciate of this tool as well, is that, it is completely on the individual that has taken the assessment to interpret its meaning and how it shows up in their life. It's powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah, powerful. Now, another big lesson that your life represents is the lesson of impermanence, right? That shows up in many different ways. And where I'm alluding to here is, even when things are going very well, you started this organization with your friend, the assessment with your friend. Eventually that relationship, or at least the professional version of it, comes to an end at one point. Can you speak to that moment? What was happening, what it sort of brought up in you, and how you then came out the other side?
It's exactly that, impermanence. And now with perspective, it really does feel like that is how life works. Things are born, you get a life, and then they die. And that's really what happened. There was 10 years from the moment 2010, when the sort of started, to 2020. And there was a huge creation, and there was an acceleration, and there was actually going and doing a lot of the work, and proof of concept, and all these things happen. And there was, an incredible collaboration and synergy with my partner at the time. But like towards 2018, 19, you could start to feel that something was breaking down. And of course, the tendency is you want to hold on to it. For me, I really wanted to hold on, and we have a good thing here. So, there was a lot of trying to fix, trying to maybe even put aside signs, that were showing up. And then it got to a bit of a breaking point. And then it's just like, it's one of the most painful things to let go, right? And to accept that, that journey together had come to an end, and that a lot of things that were sort of built around that were also coming to an end. So a lot of the community that we had, that had sort of forged around this, many people just went off on doing their own thing again. And what happened was I ended up finding myself alone again, 10 years later. And it was very painful and confusing. And I didn't know if I wanted to take this forward, because my partner had said he didn't want to do this work anymore. Right? So he had other things. And so it was really up to me to figure out, do I still have it in me to commit another 10 years to this work and to reinvent? And at the time, I didn't actually think about reinventing, but eventually it came to me that if I was going to do it, there would have to be quite a big reinvention and how I think about myself, but also how I think about the next phase of this work. And at some point that happened. I started to get a vision of where it could go. I started to get new insights, and the energy started to come back slowly at first, and then it accelerated, and then now it's obviously 5 years in that so much has happened. But it took a good, again, year, 2 years for the transition out.
What resources, what helped you navigate that period?
A lot of time on my own, to be honest, Jonathan. And I had to become comfortable. I had to reconnect with myself. So part of what had kind of gone wrong is I'd lost touch with my own power in that relationship. It had kind of gone a little bit messy, and I just had to re-find myself, re-anchor myself. And there was no one who could do that for me. So it was actually and it was COVID, of course, right? So we were all offline, and there was, very little face-to-face contact. I also wrote, actually, and that's when I ended up writing The Being Entrepreneur, which was my sort of a bit, my stepping back. This was a big part of actually the writing, because I wanted to capture the story of the past 10 years. And I knew it was an entrepreneurial journey, and I knew it was not a typical entrepreneurial journey. And so I ended up calling it The Being Entrepreneur, so being entrepreneurship. And it was basically a very personal story, the one that I've just shared with you, right? But going into more detail. And it was what allowed me to close that chapter, actually. It was the writing that allowed me to close the chapter. And it took a good year, probably a bit more than a year. And, of course, there's people who are reading it, and people who really have enjoyed it, but that wasn't the purpose. It was not to get this out into the world. It was really a kind of a healing journey I had to go through. And one thing I know about my process is writing helps me work through things, process. So it was very healing to actually write that.
It's interesting that at two of the biggest pivot points in your life, you turned to creativity and creative expression. So the first time with the documentary, and the second time with the book, that these things were birthed from these moments.
That's really good observation. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. In retrospect, what lessons have you gained that you can apply moving forward around business partnership, and how to approach that, and how to nurture that, how to engage with that?
Yeah. I love partnerships, and that was one of the sad things. I love working with people. I love collaborating. I'm always the first to say, let's co-create. Let's just, and so I missed it. I really did miss it. And I think the lesson is it's great to co-create, but I really had to anchor myself much more. And every time I tried, like there were of course moments where I would try to sort of I was being shown that no, it's not the right time. Not the right time. You're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. So I really had to go through quite some time where I just had to refocus on myself, on my own vision. There was a lot about getting clarity on 2030. It was sort of that 10-year horizon again. And being able to articulate, being able to really root it in a new vision. And then recreating the platform, the whole assessment platform got reinvented significantly in that time. And that was a lot of sort of behind the scenes work, but it was also the building of the roots. And what was amazing is that, at some point when those roots were there, I guess, then people like Amrita started to show up. Right. And And it just happened very effortlessly. There was no me needing to make something happen. It just happened. And I guess that's when, I knew that I was ready. I was ready to go and work and collaborate and co-create.
Mm.
But it took time.
Yeah.
But and it was difficult because I get so much joy out of it. I love that.
Yeah. What is your relationship between vision and emergence? So what I mean by that is having a vision. You mentioned the 10-year, to 2030 and working towards it. Like, okay, this is my goal. This is what I'm after, versus sensing into and noticing what is naturally emerging and trusting in that unfolding. What is your relationship between these two that aren't necessarily in conflict, but they can seem at times like they are?
Yeah. I think at the essence level, the vision and the unfolding are very similar. I think in the form level, there's often a disconnect. And if we pay attention to the form, then if we pay too much attention to the form, then it can feel like, oh, we're off track and what's emerging is not aligned with my vision and this and that. So I think I've gotten better at anchoring a vision more into the essence. And I'll give you an example. Like, one of the big shifts that happened within me was realizing that human potential development is a human right, basic human right? That we all have been given a gift, and we all have the right, and we should all have the ability to express that gift. But we don't all have, the resources and the ability to hire a coach and to, go to trainings and workshops. So I started to reframe this whole human potential work and the assessment, that lens, and started to think like, rather than just think about this as an assessment where somebody fills a questionnaire and then they get a report sent, and then they need to work with a coach to figure out what the report means. How about create a platform where the assessment is just one part of it, but it's a portal where there's tremendous amount of resources that can be accessed, and where, people can help themselves to learn more about who they are. And they can obviously, still reach out to people. But there are, videos, inspirational videos, there are, exercises, challenges, all of these things put into a portal where the assessment is one aspect of it. So that is, I would say, how the vision and the actual work started to connect for
Mm.
this vision of a world where everyone is living their full potential, right? All should have access to it. And then even moving it to making this a free platform, right? There's no paywall. We didn't have that before, right? It was like, you want to take the assessment? Okay, it costs this much. But no, this is a different model where it's open, it's free, it's accessible to anyone who wants to go on that path. And that's a significant shift in how to think about the work and my role in this. So from a vision point of view, it's quite significant. It's different,
Yeah.
but it influences a lot of things, right? It's how do you democratize access to human potential development? Well, technology can be a great enabler. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think I'm very connected to that essence of democratizing access, it being a human right, that, a world where everyone can express their full potential.
Mm.
What is my role in that?
Yeah.
How can I build a bit in that space?
Well, certainly everybody that wants to, right? Because there's also a large swath of the population that are not even thinking about human potential. In fact, how do you, go into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just from that very standpoint, there's people that for whom survival is primary. So potential is not even anywhere near a thought. How do you make sense of that part? Because there is a world, right? There's a utopian vision for what AI can bring to this world where resources are in abundance and folks are every need that somebody has is being met. So perhaps there will be more and more people that can focus on things like potential. But then just to add more into the mix, a world in which AI has taken over so many of the expressions of that potential that interferes with that. And so now we're entering into an interesting world. So I don't have a complete thought here, just kind of putting together kind of what's emerging societally here, where technology is coming to a place where it can democratize something like potential, but at the same time, the outlets, where somebody can express that potential, perhaps might be hindered as a result of it as well.
Yeah, a few things here. I mean, the readiness is for sure, and that always will be, key. So this is never about pushing anything on anyone, but it's an invitation to anyone who wants to explore, who's ready to explore, and removing, as many barriers as possible for them to be able to do that. I do believe, yes, the hierarchy need is real, and people who are, very much in the survival mode are not going to pay a lot of attention to, realizing their gifts. But I do think that, in many parts of the world, there's a, standards of living are rising, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but that's one thing. And the other thing I think is that there's a generation shift. I see a lot of younger people looking at this work and really resonating with it. They get it right away. Energetically, they feel it. They do yearn for self-realization instead of, climbing the corporate ladder. That's more important to them, to be able to find work that is meaningful, impactful, where they can be themselves. So I think generationally, we're seeing a shift there. And, but yeah, there's going to be, there's definitely, it's not for everyone. So the readiness is important. When it comes to AI, I actually think this is the human dimension is the thing that is actually going to separate us, keep us unique on AI, because, at least for the foreseeable future, AI is going to have a hard time, being able to truly feel compassion for, or to truly, embody some of these qualities that are inherent to us as human beings. And if we're going to keep trying to compete at the rational, mental level, intellect level, we're going to be obsolete very, very quick. We already are pretty much obsolete. So the way that we stay relevant in a world of accelerating AI is actually to double down on our humanness, on becoming more human, even more human.
Yeah.
So that's what I believe, that's sort of what also inspires me to keep moving this forward. And then there's actually the time is really now, to really stand for it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And in so many ways, this tool, this assessment that you created is that assessment of those qualities that are going to be needed in the 22nd century. I would argue.
Yeah.
Those are the very human qualities that do indicate what human potential ultimately is going to mean for more and more people over time.
I do think so.
Yeah.
And if AI can support us in expressing more of our human potential, that's great. Right? I'm looking at, virtual AI coach would be on the platform. They could meet people there, and support them. but it would be trained according to the, the best practices of debriefing and coaching. So it would be really, very tuned into, you're not the expert AI. I know that, we utilize you as the all knowing, you go to ChatGPT and you ask a question, you get an answer.
Yeah.
But no, you're designed to actually not know, right? You're designed to ask questions, to mirror back, to hear, to observe, and to, to be the space holder. And, from very first kind of prototyping that we're starting to do, we're starting to see that actually is possible and can design it in that way. And I think then technology can become a huge enabler to further unleash what's already within us. And
Yeah, no question.
this is also part of, where I feel this can go, right? But it has to be very carefully thought through and designed. And
Yeah. There's a collective emergence that is happening that we're all stepping into that can only be discovered by taking steps forward. Each of us, these maximized potentialities out in the world that are feeling called to be expressions of this work are stepping into that new vision for the world. And this is one of them. The work that we do at the center is another version of that, of the same, and so we have these different lighthouses that are now serving this emergence. I think that collectively we need. So it's really beautiful to hear the work that you're doing. And also your life, the past 15 years has been an example of that, from sensing something needs to change, something needs to shift. I don't know what it is, but I know something needs to change. I sense an inkling of it, but let me just take the leap to today. Look at in 15 years, how that emergence and vision have come together into something concrete and tangible, where 15 years ago, you couldn't have imagined, in a sense,
no,
you'd be here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. As we close up this conversation, for those listeners that are here, what advice, what message might you give them on their own transformational journeys as they're navigating it and processing it, and perhaps even seeking to be of service to the world?
Yeah, two things stand out in our conversation that actually came up. One is the anchor. So building that strong inner anchor of knowing who you are and where, why are you here? That for me was a big one. Why am I here? And embracing those gifts. Like for me, it was a sensitivity, the thing that I was always told that needed to change, and then actually embracing it as a real gift. I think that anchor, and then the other thing was the iteration, ability to iterate, and to not take things personal. Because when we're creating something new, especially something that comes from the inside, which I think a lot of the listeners will probably relate to, you want to create from the inside out. You're bringing something new into the world that is not going to be understood right away, or not as well understood as you would like it to be. And you're going to get feedback that will feel like maybe a bit of an attack, or personal. And I think that's very natural, and it's good to go through that, to feel that, but to not get stuck in it. So there is a way of working with that energy and transforming it and making it into a creative energy. And I think that over and over again, I've seen that when there is tension, when there's sort of stuckness, that is also the beginning of something new. If I'm willing to work with, if I'm willing to embrace it and allow it to do what it needs to do. So I think those would be the two things that are coming up.
Wonderful. Mark, thank you.
And you very much helped me see that, Jonathan, I think what I love about this conversation, that there are these mirrors back, and it makes me become more aware of the journey and see it through a new light again every time. So I just really want to thank you for the beautiful space holding and the beautiful presence, the depth of listening. All of that was just remarkable.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you so much, for sharing so much of yourself. I know that this story is going to resonate with so many people. It's going to help so many people to understand what's needed, what it takes, and that they already have what they need in order to move ahead. Sure, it requires a little bit of courage and trust, but that is what the journey requires of us, certainly. And your life is an embodiment of that courage and trust. And thank you. Thank you again for being here with me.
Thank you so much for being with us today. To learn more about today's guest, visit our podcast landing page at www.podcast.centerfortransformationalcoaching.com. You'll find links to their website, social media, and anything else they might want to share there. And if you're curious to explore more about our work, our trainings, or the deep coaching approach, you'll find everything at www.centerfortransformationalcoaching.com. A new episode of this podcast releases every 2 weeks, so please subscribe wherever you listen to stay up to date. Until next time, stay present, embrace love, and continue sensing into what life is calling you toward. See you soon.